Hey everyone. So this next topic is about how to study for the USMLE Step 1. I noticed that this is one of the most common questions asked on all the forums everywhere. All the students that I've ever mentored or tutored, they always ask, how should I study for Step 1? What should I use to study for Step 1? And it's simple at the same time. You have to tailor it to the way you're studying and where you are in your phase of studying. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean what stage you're in. Okay. A lot of people can actually be in either their early stages, or mid or even late stages of studying. Okay, what does that mean? Early, I would say, you're still in med school. I mean, your first 2 years of med school, you're in your basic sciences, where you're learning, your different classes like anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, or you're finishing it up there. Okay, mid means you're done with all that, and actually you're in that phase of you are actually in the core studying of step one. And late would be, okay, I have, let's say, 2, 3 weeks left. What should I be doing during this time, right? Okay, so it all depends. It's really, really different depending on where you are. Okay, now the first thing I should tell you all is, one thing everyone always asks is, when should I start studying for step one? And I think what most people don't realize is the day you walk into med school is the day you start. Okay, the studying that you do throughout your med school is the most beneficial studying you can do to step one. Okay, it's not the 2, 3 weeks at the end that count. It's actually the 2 years that you spend studying your classes. So what I'm going to say to you is that, if you're in med school right now and if you're studying those classes, pay attention to those classes now. Okay, learn the material right um, the first time. Okay, now what I mean by that is, when you review something in physiology, you review the cardiac action action potentials, the SA node and the ventricular action potentials, for example. Study it as if this is my last time I'm seeing it. Okay, that's what you should be telling yourself. This is my last time or last chance I'll get to see it. Okay, what will that do? That'll make your brain and your body say, okay, well, I better learn it right now. One of the most common mistakes people do is that they study something and they review, something in physiology or anatomy or biochemistry or something like that. And they say to themselves, oh, okay, I've learned it a bit now, but you know what? I'll review it later. No, there's no later, okay? There's no such thing. You have to learn it well the first time, okay? Because there's a lot of information and you can't count on just being able to review it. Yeah, will you review it again some point later? Yes. But you know what? If you train your mind to think like that, you're not going to learn it well, all right? So now getting back, study right the first time around, all throughout med school, your classes, everything. Make sure you really, really build a strong foundation, okay? That's really what it comes down to. How good is your foundation? When you finish your last semester of your basic sciences, where your all of your pharmacology, pathology, those classes, you have to gauge yourself at that point. Okay, how am I doing? Am I doing really, really well, and do I just need a couple weeks or some 3, 4 weeks to study for step one and I'm good to go, or do I need 3 or 4 months to study? Okay. What I did is, after I finished my last semester at med school and was about to study for step one, what I did is I actually took an NBME to gauge myself how I did. Now, again, the next question everyone asks is, oh, which one did you take? It doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't really matter. Yes, one may be difficult than the other, but that's not really the case, because they test different material, okay? And I'll talk more about this a little later. Okay, so that's what I did. I took an NBME, I got a certain score, and said to myself, okay, I'm doing okay. This is what I got. This is what I want to get. How much time should I take to study now? All right. Now, getting back now, I can't emphasize more that your foundation of physiology, pathophysiology, pharmacology, pathology, all this stuff is really important, okay? Because you won't be able to learn pathology unless you understand physio, okay? Okay. If you don't understand how the sodium potassium channel ATPases work in physiology, you won't be able to understand how digoxin works. Okay, that's just one quick random example that I'm giving you. You have to know your normal before you understand the abnormal, okay, which is pathology. Okay, everyone's rushing and when they're taking their first some semester classes to understand pathology, to understand Turner syndrome, to understand all these different diseases like aortic stenosis. Well, you know what? First, understand the cardiac output, the cardiac cycle, all of these things before you go on to understand abnormal. Okay, that's really really important, and that's one place where a lot of students go wrong. All right. Now, getting to stuff, what should you be using to study, right? Now, let's say you're in your mid phase here, okay? We talked about, your basic sciences early on, foundation, and how you should be using your school's books, Kaplan, all these things in the early on stage. But what about the mid and late stages? What should you be using? The one thing I'll tell you right now is to limit your resources. If you have a table in front of you with 50 books on there, you're going wrong, okay? And I bet most of you probably have that, okay? That is where you'll go wrong. It's better to do a few resources really well than doing a lot of resources not in depth and not well at all, okay? Because if you have a lot of books in front of you, how much percentage of time do you think you're spending on any of one of them? You're distributing it all. You're spending 5% of your time on each one, and you're not going anywhere. You're not making progress. You're reviewing the same things over and over again in every single book, and that's a waste of time, okay? So the first thing you need to do is set out and ask yourself and tell yourself, these are the books and these are the resources I'm going to use. I'm not going to open anything else. All right, and I know it's tough for a lot of med students to do that. I was one of them. I'm still one of them. And to not open a fourth book or fifth book to check, don't do it. Okay, only do it if you don't understand something in one book. So the first thing I'll tell you to use, first aid. All right, I don't have to tell you to use this because everyone already knows this. This book is more in depth than you could probably imagine. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean the first time you read this book, you're probably going to extract about 65% of the information you need to extract. Well, you're going to say to me, well, what do you mean by that, 65%? I read it the first time and I got everything. No, okay? I thought the same thing. When I read it the first time, and I took tests, I took NBMEs, I took, different things on UWorld, I was getting a certain score. But you know what? When I went back and read it for the second time, I extracted close to maybe 85% of the information. Okay, that's like 20% of information that's in the book that you just overlook, and it'll only come to you if you read it the second time. Okay, you will. I promise you, there's very, very few people out there who can read it the first time and extract 85% of the information in there. It's really in depth. Every word, every sentence can be made into a question. Okay, what do I mean by that? That I mean that a lot of questions on UWorld, a lot of questions on NBME, a lot of questions on Step One are literally from first aid, where you can actually go back to first aid, look at those 3, 4 words, and say, "Wow, this is where the answer came from," and this is the answer right here. Okay, so don't dismiss, a couple sentences, 4 words here, 5 words there. Don't dismiss anything. Don't say that this is not important. Everything is important. Okay, and anything can be a question. Right. So first aid, you read it first time, second time, read it a third time if you can. Okay, and you're probably going to be getting close to 100% here. And the third time when you read it, you're going to be telling me right now, you're probably going to be saying to me, well, I don't have this much time to be reading first aid. I can't read it 3 times. Well, the thing is, it goes like this. The first time you read it, spend a good amount of time. What do I mean by that? I mean, study each page carefully, read each word um, carefully, okay? I don't mean the second and third time don't read it carefully, but the first time really go in depth and spend a good amount of time in every single chapter, every page to understand everything. The second time you read it, do it a bit quicker, okay? Do it a bit quicker. Don't spend that much time on each page because let's face it, you don't have that much time to be spending anyways. And at the same time, don't waste your time going over the same information again. Okay, this is what I find students doing all the time. Is they read about the cardiac cycle. The first time, and they spend all this time and all this time in it, and then the second time they review it, they spend like the same amount of time. Don't do that, okay? You know something? You probably don't realize this, but think of the fact of you knowing that there's a heart in the human body. You know that fact pretty well, right? Well, you know what? You probably know things about the cardiac cycle as well as you know that fact. Okay? But you just don't realize it. And you spend the same amount of time going over the same cardiac cycle, spend the same amount of time going over Turner syndrome when you already know, it's the monosomy X, etc., etc. Okay? If you know something already, skip it. Look at it, read it, and ask yourself, do I know this already? Do I know it well? That if you do, skip it. Don't waste your time on it. Why? Is because you have to study a lot of other things. There are a lot of other things that you need to be studying, right? Now, the third time you read it, this is what I call rapid review. And this comes back to the last 2-3 weeks of you studying. What I mean by rapid review, I mean flipping through first aid. Okay, every page that you go through, you're not spending more than I would say 15 seconds on any page. Now you're probably thinking, well, that's crazy. How can I possibly do that? You can do that. Okay, and the intention here in this third read during the later stage here is not so much to memorize but to review. It's just so that your brain can see the information and refresh. That's the whole purpose of the third review and the fourth review here. Okay, it's not to sit there for 4 hours on each chapter and study it. No, flip through pages. Just look at it. Look at it. You'll be surprised. You know a lot more. And I know it's hard because you're going to be flipping through and say, "Oh my God, I don't know this. I don't know this. I don't know this." Well, that's okay. Just put that fear underneath and just look at it. Just refresh yourself, and you'll actually be surprised. You actually do know it. All right, but that's just something you have to do. All right, now. Let's talk about some other supplements that you could possibly use. Now, what are some other books that you should be using? Well, Golgin is one of them, right? That's one of the most useful books I could possibly think of for step one, okay? You know, actually personally read Golgin, I would say 2.5 times. And again, I know you're probably thinking, that's way too much time for me to be spending on, a book like that. It's way too much time. Well, it's not because it's really, really useful. Okay, and the first time you read it again, it's going to be really in depth. It's a really detailed book, and I know it's a lot to read. Okay, but really, Golgin is one of the books that you should be reading during your med school. Should be read during your pathology classes. Um, during when you're actually studying, for it, and you have like a lot of time. You won't be able to read this book in a matter of, a week. This book is actually something that you have to spend weeks on, and do it right the first time, okay? And really, I can't tell you a better source for pathology than this book. I really found this book to be really, really helpful in a lot of the USMLE World and BME and on step one, okay? And again, I personally read it a little more than twice. I would say at least read it once. And the second and third time you read it, okay, If you can, you don't have to read it all the way. Just review the blue side points, okay? On the side of the page where they have all those, basically high yield notes. Just review those at least if you can't read the book. Okay, these are basically really high yield points, high yield questions. Okay, and again, when you read these blue side points, don't just read them. Make questions out of them. Okay, that's a skill that I learned, too late actually. I should have learned this earlier, is that you should make questions as you study. When you make questions, you get into this mode of designing questions yourself. You understand how the test makers make questions, do it yourself. Because that way, if there's a question on, let's say, carbon monoxide poisoning, okay, and you learn about it, read about it in Golden, etc. Make a question out of it, randomly, and you'll see me doing that during my lectures as well, is making questions as you go along. That way, they can't ask you anything that'll surprise you. There's no way they can ask you something that'll surprise you, and that's what step one really is, asking the same concepts just in different ways. Okay? They ask the same thing, okay, every single time, but just in different ways. Guys, you have to understand, medicine does not change from year to year. They don't have a brand new physiology book every year that they're testing you on. It's the same facts. It's the same physiology. It's the same human body every year that they have. It's just that they just need to ask you in a different way because, they need to change their questions somehow. By you making questions as you go along, you make the questions and you make the different ways, how carbon monoxide can be asked. And if you look at my other lectures, you can see what I'm talking about. Look at it from different angles, pharmacology wise, pathology wise, biochemistry wise, what's going on everywhere. Okay. And that's something that you can actually learn to do. But if you feel like it's difficult for you now, just watch the lectures, see how I do it, and try doing it yourself. Okay. Um, Now, the third resource that I really, really liked, and I think is essential, is UWorld, USMLE World, right? This is one of the most important things you could possibly spend your time on. Okay, the first thing I'll say is, people ask me, there's so many other, Q banks out there, like Kaplan, Q Bank, etc., etc. I've spent some time doing them, but I mean, I don't know as well as about them as I know UWorld. I'll tell you one thing though, your time is best spent doing UWorld. Best spent doing UWorld, okay? And now I mean doing every question at least twice. Okay? Do every question at least twice. Now, how can you do this? When you do UWorld, okay, and you make your exam test, mark questions. Mark them, okay, and say, oh well, this question I feel like I'll forget. I feel like I'll forget it. Mark it. That way you can go back and redo it. Okay. Now, UWorld, should be the place where you're spending time. Again, I know a lot of students who sit there doing UWorld. Some part of their day they do Kaplan, Q Bank, then they do, the first aid, Q Bank, etc., etc. That's a waste of time. You're spending so much time, on these random other questions. Yeah, I know you're doing questions in different ways, but really focus on one way. Okay, just one UWorld bank. Do it well. Do it right the first time. Okay. That's really one of the most important things. Um, the other thing is, our Kaplan videos. Okay, these are actually pretty good for a lot of subjects, especially physiology. Okay, and I know they're long. There are a lot of videos. You spend a lot of time doing them, but it's actually worth it. Would I be watching Kaplan physio videos a week before my test? No. Okay, this is something that you do, like I said before, in your early stages of studying, where you're building your foundation. Okay, that's when you're watching these Kaplan videos. It's when you're building your foundation. That's when you review physio. The neuro videos are really good too. And biochemistry is good. And a lot of them are actually good. Um, but that's actually a really good resource. Um, Now, the other thing is, well, what about, let's say, cell bio? What about neuro? What about all these other subjects? How can I study them? Because there's not enough of that in first aid. There's supplemental sources. Okay. Now, especially for cell bio, they have that that cell bio book, the high yield one. I remember I read that myself. It's really detailed, so don't spend way too much time on it, but just make sure you know your pathways, like the CAMP pathways and all that, because they really test that a lot. And supplemental sources, using the neuro high yield book, and here and there, use it to your discretion. Look at what subjects you feel you're weak in, and then use another smaller book for it to supplement it. All right. Okay. Now, the other thing I actually wanted to talk about were NBMEs. Okay. Now, this is one of the biggest things that people always confuse themselves about. Is that when should I take them? How? Why should I take them? Okay. The first thing I want to say is that most of you probably have taken NBME. Do not let them demoralize you. Okay. Um, because a lot of times students will take an NBME early on and not do well. Okay. Or not do as well as they'd like to. Do not let this demoralize you. Okay. The NBMEs are not designed to tell you, um, what score you'll get. They will not tell you what score you'll get. Okay, they're not designed to demoralize you. They're not designed to make you quit studying. Okay, they might make you want to do that, but they won't do any of that. Okay, they're actually designed to teach you how to study. And you've probably never heard anyone say this before, right? But it's true. They're designed to teach you how to study. What do I mean by that? I take an NBME, right? Let's say on April 1st. Okay. Um, Once I take an NBME on April 1st, I get a certain score X. Okay. It's not that good. But you know what? When I go back now and study first aid, Golgi, UWorld, I'll say to myself, hey, you know what? This question was on the NBME. This question was on the NBME. And in first aid, when I read first aid now, I'll be able to read it in a new light. Okay? In a new way. Because now when I read first aid, I'll say to myself, oh, this is what they actually like testing. You tend to learn the patterns when you do NBMEs. You understand what the test makers like testing, what they like testing, and how they like testing it. Okay, the more you do these NBME questions, the more you learn how they test it. That way when you make your own questions in first aid, you make them more similar to the NBME questions. Okay, when I read Golgi now, I'll be able to say, wow, that was in the NBME Q bank, or the question test. I should read this again. This was really important. This was tested. This was tested. It'll help you remember it. Okay. USMLE World. When you go do NBME tests and you go do URoll, then you have a better understanding again of how they test it and what they test. Okay. So that's what NBMEs are. How many NBMEs should you take? Well, I took all of them. But if you can't do all of them, try doing as many as you can. And I know they cost money, etc., etc. But they're really designed to teach you how to study. Okay, and I think they're really helpful to do that. Okay. Um, Now there are actually the UWorld self-assessments also. There are two of them, okay? Should you do them? Yes, okay? They're actually really good. I'll tell you one thing right now, and you can take my word for this or not, but the one test, practice test, that comes closest to the difficulty level of actual step one, I would have said it's one of the self-assessments. Okay, when it comes to difficulty level, and do I mean, oh, what you get on your self-assessment is your score and what you'll get? No. Okay, your score can fluctuate. Remember, every person is stronger in some subjects and weaker in some. Okay, let's say I'm strong in Path, Physio, Farm. Okay, that's student A. Student B is strong in Biochem, Psych, Micro. Okay. Now the thing is when you get your test, yeah, it'll be a combination of all these different subjects. But you know what? What happens is on the step, on step one, you tend to get more questions in certain subjects than others. Student A has a probability of getting a test filled with Path, Physio, and Farm, but you know what? They have a probability of getting a test filled with Path, Physio, Psych, Micro, etc., etc. Okay, they might not get Farm as much as student B might get Farm. Okay, so that's what it is. It's a roulette game. Okay, you never know what subject they'll go hard in on your test. Okay, so that's the reason why you have to study everything. Every subject, you have to study it. Okay, you can't skip out on subjects because what if you skip out on psych and you get 10 to 15 questions on your test about psych, which can happen. Okay, so you have to make sure you study everything. All right. Now again, the self-assessments on UWorld, there are two of them. I would do these closer towards my real exam. Okay, for two purposes. One, to give you an assessment of whether or not you're ready. And that's one of the biggest questions everyone always asks. Am I ready to take this test? Use the self-assessment to tell you that. Okay, take it 2 weeks before your test, 3 weeks before your test, and if you get a passing score or a score good enough to say, okay, you know what, I can go ahead and do this, then go ahead and do it. If you are 2-3 weeks before your test and you fail the self-assessment, do not go ahead and take your test. You will most likely fail it. Okay, unless you pass the self-assessment, I really don't suggest you go and take the test. Okay. Now, getting back now to the overall picture. Now we talked about all sorts of different things, but I think the one thing that you all have to remember is limit your resources. Okay, choose your books, your etc. your Q banks from the beginning and stick to them. Do not change your plan in the middle unless they're really not working and you're not doing it right, okay? Unless they're really, really not working, then change it. But make a plan, make a timeline, and say, okay, you know what? From this month to this month to this week, I'm going to study physio, micro, etc., etc. Make a plan. Always make a plan, a timeline, okay? That's the most important thing. And in this timeline, stick NBMEs in the middle. Do not stack all the NBMEs at the end. Because you know what? You wasted them. Why? Is because, like I told you, NBMEs are designed to teach you how to study, okay? This other thing, I want you to remember is to make questions, like I do, as you go along. Really important, okay? Making questions as you go along. And that way the test makers can't surprise you in anything you do. And in any question. Okay. The last thing I want to tell you guys is that studying for step one, you have to set a certain time, okay? if I give myself 6 months to study, okay, month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll tell you one thing right now. Whatever I'm studying in months 4, 5, 6, okay, I probably have already forgotten what I learned in the first 3 months. I'm sorry, my memory span, like most people, is not that good. Okay, I mean some people can probably do it, but I personally can't, and I think a lot of you can't either. Okay, it's difficult. Okay, what you're learning in these later months, you've probably already forgotten these things. So the analogy I like to use is studying for step one is um, taking in a breath of air. Think about it, okay? You're taking in a breath of air. All that air is information, concepts, facts, different things, okay? And the thing is, you know, when you take in that breath of air, hold it. That's when you're retaining the information. And when you go to the test, let it out. What my point is that you cannot hold your breath for that long. You cannot retain this information forever. That's what my point is, okay? So if you're thinking you're going to study for 9 months, think again, because whatever you learn in the first 4 months, you're probably forgotten in the later months. So pick like a short burst of air, a short burst of learning everything quick. And this kind of coincides with my rapid review thing that I was telling you about earlier. Learn everything quick in a burst of a month or two or something. In the last month or two before your test, go over everything, review everything quickly and well, and that way you can actually hold it and retain it, and then let it out on your test. Okay. All right. And if you guys have any other questions, comments, please feel free to comment below. Okay. Thanks.